Rolex is one of the most famous watch brands in the world. However, much of its history is shrouded in mystery and secrets. Despite this, it is known that the brand was built by an orphan with no money or connections. The story of Rolex is an incredible rags to riches tale. It is fascinating to consider how the founder managed to build such a successful brand, despite the odds stacked against him. But how did Rolex become so massively successful so ahead of time? How did a pocket watch become a status symbol as much as a Lamborghini? What makes Rolex so expensive? We find out the answers to these questions in this video. So sit back and keep watching till the end. Chapter 1. Early life of Hans Wilsdorf. The founder of Rolex was an innovative and mysterious man named Hans Wilsdorf. He was born in Germany in 1881 to parents Anna and Jonah Wilsdorf. Hans had a happy childhood, filled with love and laughter, but all that came crashing down when his parents died when he was just 12 years old. Suddenly, he became an orphan and had to go live with his uncles, who sent him off to boarding school. Hans eventually fell in love with watchmaking. He landed a job with a watch manufacturer and just fell in love with the precision and innovation required in the industry. Chapter 2. Hans Wilsdorf and his first inspiration. After graduating, Hans Wilsdorf went to work in Switzerland for a company called Kuno Korten, which was a large exporter of pocket watches. And because Hans spoke German, English, and French fluently, he found work as a clerk and correspondent for the firm quite easily. However, Kuno Korten also manufactured some of their own watches. This gave Hans a golden opportunity to understand and study watchmaking. While much of Hans's job involved boring tasks like winding hundreds of watches each day, he developed a deep knack for the craft. He became obsessed with the idea of creating perfect watches. During his time at Kuno Korten, Hans learned all he could about the industry and began to develop his own ideas about how to make the perfect watch. Chapter 3. How he understood sales and marketing. In 1903, Hans Wilsdorf moved to London to work for another company. This job gave him a bigger role, as he was involved in getting new sales and clients for the company. Through this work, he learned a skill that was perhaps as important as watchmaking, which is marketing and sales. With this vision in mind, Hans set out to start his own watch company. Chapter 4. His time starts. In 1905, Hans Wilsdorf, aged 24, decided to start his own watchmaking firm with a small amount of money he had saved up. Together with his brother-in-law, Alfred Davis, they founded the Wilsdorf and Davis Company, and they decided to import watches from Switzerland to sell in Britain. However, wristwatches were not yet popular, and pocket watches were strongly preferred. Despite criticism from his friends and peers, Hans believed that wristwatches were more convenient and elegant, and that they would eventually replace pocket watches. Hans knew that brand recognition was going to be crucial, and that it all began with having a memorable name. He claimed that he initially tried combining random letters of the alphabet to come up with hundreds of unique names, but none of them felt quite right. He then claimed that while riding to work one day, a genie whispered the name Rolex in his ear. Chapter 5. The beginning and rise of Rolex. Now, regardless of where the name really came from, it was perfect. Rolex is short and memorable, but also easy to pronounce in any language. Plus, Rolex felt like it had style and authority to it. In 1910, Rolex became the first wristwatch to be awarded the Swiss Certificate of Precision. And then, in 1914, the British Kew Observatory awarded a Rolex watch a Class A rating, which no other watch of that kind had been given before. Rolex was starting to develop an association with quality, which helped attract even more sales. However, in 1914, the First World War broke out. Chapter 6. The War and Rolex. By this point, Rolex had more than 60 employees on its payroll in London and had become the export center to every market the company sold to. However, during World War, Germany became Britain's enemy. As Hans was of German descent, with a German name and a German accent, tensions began to rise. Not just that, the British government imposed a wartime import duty of 33% on all luxury goods. To avoid any conflict, and to get some major tax benefits, Hans decided to move Rolex headquarters from England to Switzerland, which was neutral during the war. While many watch companies went bankrupt during World War, Rolex's wristwatches became a favorite amongst the military for their reliability and convenience over pocket watches. Undoubtedly, the real rapid growth of Rolex can be attributed to Hans's marketing instincts. As early as the 1920s, Hans was putting his watches on explorers, athletes, racers, aviators, and countless other successful people, which created a connection in consumers' minds between high achievers and Rolex. Hans also ran hundreds of expertly placed ads on the radio and in newspapers, as he understood the value of product placement decades before most of his competitors would catch up. In 1926, Rolex created the world's first commercial fully waterproof watch under the name of Oyster. Hans had the perfect idea of how to market that too, as he'd heard about a woman who was going to swim in the English Channel. Hans convinced her to do so, wearing Rolex's new waterproof watch. The next groundbreaking milestone in Rolex's history came just 5 years later, when Rolex's engineers developed the perpetual rotor, which automatically wound a watch, something that had been previously considered impossible. Hans also made it his mission to ensure the most popular people in the world wore a Rolex, especially those involved in daring challenges. For example, the first flight to Everest was performed by a crew wearing a Rolex Oyster, and Malcolm Campbell wore a Rolex watch when he set a land speed record in Utah back in 1935. In 1945, on the 40th anniversary of the company, Rolex released another new model called the Datejust, the world's first automatic watch to feature a date window on its dial. However, shortly before the ceremony to announce this, Hans was struck by another tragedy. Chapter 7: Tragedy and the Way Forward. Hans Wilsdorf, the founder of Rolex, experienced a devastating period in his life when his beloved wife Florence passed away due to an illness. Having been orphaned at 12 years old and now widowed at 63 with no children, Wilsdorf started to think more about his own mortality. He spent the next few years developing a way to ensure the future of his empire. Thus, in 1946, he established the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation and transferred his 100% ownership stake in Rolex to the foundation. To this day, the organization still maintains full ownership and control of Rolex. Since it's a foundation and not a company, there are no corporation taxes on any profits. This structure allows Rolex to maintain a very high level of secrecy. Rolex's employees also have strict non-disclosure agreements, and no photos are allowed inside the Rolex building. Thus, Rolex operates from the shadows, making it nearly impossible to critique anything Rolex does because no one really knows. However, there was one major road bump in the 1970s when the quartz revolution came and battery-operated watches were made. Despite this, Rolex was fine. Why can they continue to charge so much for their watches? Chapter 8: Why Rolex is so expensive. In 2017, a Daytona Rolex that belonged to the late Hollywood star Paul Newman was sold at auction for an astonishing price of $17.7 million. While you don't need to spend that much money to get a Rolex, even the most entry-level model would still set you back many thousands of dollars. Why? The answer seems fairly straightforward. Rolex watches are just really well made, and you're buying something that will last you a lifetime. However, this is not the full story. Rolex is not just a watch. It is a status symbol. In fact, it seems to be a universal symbol of wealth. From rappers on the streets of New York to members of the British royal family, countless iconic figures have worn Rolex watches, including John F. Kennedy, Winston Churchill, Steve McQueen, Elvis Presley, Martin Luther King, and many more. This level of status is clearly thanks to Rolex's high visibility marketing strategy, where it associates itself with success. For example, Rolex is the official timekeeper for both Wimbledon and Formula One. Rolexes are not the rarest or most expensive watches in the world, and the die-hard watch enthusiasts are much less likely to get a Rolex, as there are other luxury watch brands they'd likely prefer. Instead, Rolex is an upper-middle-class aspirational brand because, while they are relatively expensive, the middle class can still get them if they really save up. There's even a rumor that Hans once said, "Only great marketing is needed to make a company successful." If you like this video, then hit the like button as hard as you can. Subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon for more such videos.